How's it going, guys? Here we have for today's review a game called Deadfall Adventures. Believe it or not, I got this game by complete accident when I meant to request Dead Island from the library. My finger must have slipped on the mouse or something, because instead of clicking on Dead Island, I managed to somehow hit this game instead. So anyway, Deadfall Adventures was developed from a company I've never heard of before by the name of The Farm 51, and it was published by Nordic Games in November of last year for the 360 and PC. Apparently this game is also being released on the PS3 in summer of 2014, and if you haven't noticed, summer is already passed, so yeah. From what I understand, the PS3 edition is supposed to include a number of new things, for example, a complete overhaul in the graphics, new boss fights, a co-op survival mode, and much, much more. So, either it was cancelled or it's being delayed, much like this game, which was originally supposed to come out in July instead of November of 2013. The premise of the game is pretty straightforward. You're an adventurer named James Quarterman. Your main goal is to help a female US agent to search for a treasure named the Heart of Atlantis. However, the Russians and Nazis, since this game takes place during World War II, are out looking for this treasure as well. You travel through various parts of the world such as Egypt, the Mayan ruins, and the Arctic, and on your way you have to avoid traps, solve puzzles, and fight the Nazis, Russian, and even the undead who guard the places. The story itself is alright, although at times it does get a little too predictable. The length of the campaign is a little bit longer than the typical shooters these days, which for me took around 7-ish hours to beat. One thing I thought was funny is that the developers claim the game is all about exploration. Well, not really, since after all, it's a very linear game. Sure, there are big open areas every now and then that I guess you could explore, but saying this game is all about exploration is like saying Call of Duty is an open world game. It's just simply not true. The graphics of Deadfall Adventures fall around the mediocre category. To be completely honest, I wasn't expecting all that much, however there are many times where either in the cutscenes or the actual gameplay itself, the frame rate will very noticeably drop. It mostly happens during a sandstorm, tons of explosions, or in general too much shit happening on screen. I wouldn't mind it so much if it was something that only happened, on rare occasions, since Deadfall Adventures is a budget game. But the problem with the frame rate is somewhat common, so it makes it harder for me to look past it. Although I said the graphics are mediocre, I did enjoy how certain environments look, like the Arctic and more of the junglish areas of the Mayan ruins. But then there's other places that don't really have much going on, and, well, to be blunt, they looked uninteresting, maybe even boring in my opinion. The game's sound is also not that great. The music I enjoyed a lot, however the sound effects, at least with the explosions and guns, were almost too generic sounding, as if they didn't put that much effort into making them, which again, for a budget title, this is something I can easily look past upon. The voice acting is something I can't look past. It's just outright terrible. Well, alright, let me be completely fair. Some of the actors are okay, possibly even good, but the guy who voices the main character is just ungodly bad. And I do put some of the blame on the dialogue because they scripted this guy to have this sort of Nathan Drake-like attitude. What I mean is, he's constantly making these sarcastic comments all the goddamn time, and it just sounds super cheesy and awful. Here's a few examples of what I'm talking about exactly, so you can hear for yourself.
Into fire and into ice.
At ease, Shakespeare.
Dante, actually, Mr. Quarterman.
Sarcasm's not your thing, is it, Doc?
Whose people possess wisdom and power we can only dream.
We clearly dream about very different things, Doc.
Maybe you should reconsider your great-grandfather's writings.
Maybe those mummies should reconsider going back to sleep. You can have my lip. That's as soon as it's gone anyway.
Drop your weapons, fascists!
You dropped them, you dumb son of a fort! I just finished taking out an entire SS platoon! You think I can't handle a couple of commies?
I had a lot of mixed feelings about the gameplay of Deadfall. Like I mentioned earlier when I was talking a little bit about the story, you have puzzles to solve and traps to avoid, so it's not like the typical first-person shooter where you can just rush through mindlessly killing everything in your way without a problem. You do actually have to spend a little bit of time looking around and watching what you're doing, so you don't accidentally kill yourself by falling through a trapdoor or something, for example. Which I love, by the way, because hey, they did something different, and I always praise game companies for doing different things. The only problem is that most of the puzzles didn't take me that long to figure out. So I guess if you're looking for hard, extravagant puzzles, then this is most likely not going to do anything for you. But for those of you that do have problems figuring this stuff out, if you press right on the directional pad, the little pad of paper you carry around, shares clues to help you. And if you press left, you'll bring out a compass, and this I don't believe helps you with the puzzles in any way. However, what this does is points in the direction of a nearby treasure. These treasures are used to upgrade skills like less recoil, more health, stronger flashlight, and other various things. And speaking of the flashlight, this isn't just used to navigate dark areas. The flashlight that is given to you somehow has this magical power to burn the undead and make them vulnerable to bullets, which otherwise wouldn't have that much effect without said flashlight. I thought it was very interesting that this game has a large variety of weapons, 25 I think to be exact, and yeah, sure, they aren't realistically portrayed, though I can't really complain since after all this game is not realistic by any means whatsoever. The game's control in general is a little bit odd. I don't believe there's an aim assist, at least that I can tell, which is fine. However, for some bizarre reason, occasionally when I use the right analog to look around, the sensitivity slows down, I would guess, by half the speed. What makes this even stranger to me is that this only seems to happen when I look to my left. Why? Well, good question, because I have absolutely no idea. By the way, I don't think I even need to say this, but when you are looking around and fighting enemies, this whole sensitivity problem I have is very frustrating after a while. To be honest, I don't think I ever heard anyone complain about this before, so maybe it's just my disc or something, I don't know, but it sure ain't my controller. The enemy AI in this game is really, really bad, and there's 3 types of enemy AI. Humans, undead, and finally the bosses. The humans aren't the worst in this game, but that's not saying much since they are still really, really bad even on the hardest difficulty. What I notice is that they either stand wide out in the open to shoot or run into cover and stay there again while they shoot. They will move around into different cover or to charge after you, but as far as I remember, I don't think this happens that often, so they just kinda are there like statues. There's also other times where I'll go and rush into a couple guys from a fairly long distance and they'll just stare at me almost like a deer in the headlights thing going on, and I'll stab them without a problem. Again, these aren't even the worst enemies in the game. That award goes to the undead. Yeah, they do actually go out of their way to charge after you, however all you need to do is put up your flashlight and shoot a couple bullets and they're dead. You can be in a room with like, I don't know, 10, 20 of these things, and as long as you point the flashlight in the general direction of the undead, you really have no reason not to be able to kill them. They're probably some of the easiest enemies I've ever faced, just due to the fact that it takes little to no effort in killing them, and yeah, I get that they're mummies or whatever, perhaps they're programmed to be slow and weak on purpose. But then that raises the question, okay, if you have an enemy that is useless, why even have them in the game in the first place? Now, on the other hand, I actually enjoyed the boss fights because, quite frankly, they were way more interesting. Having said that, because of the horrible AI in general and extremely repetitive level designs, I couldn't help myself but eventually get very, very bored. And there were times where I could only play this game for about an hour and then have to take a break because I didn't want to burn myself out so much that I wouldn't touch this game again, let alone to review it. I think if the AI was significantly better and the level designs weren't so repetitive, I'd most likely have a good amount of fun with the gameplay. It's just a shame this wasn't the case for me. Now, during my time of playing, I came across many bugs and glitches. Nothing was game-breaking or whatever except on one instance that I luckily recorded. What happened was I backed up into this vehicle, and as you can see, I'm shaking around uncontrollably. What you can't exactly see is that I'm completely stuck here and I had to restart the checkpoint in order to keep playing. Other types of glitches mostly had to do with the game's graphics. For example, there's a handful of times where I go to shoot my gun and there's no animation for it. Another example is stuff floating in midair, and on one occasion there was an enemy soldier glitched halfway into the wall while he was running in place. Deadfall also has 2 online modes, but unfortunately because I don't have, or really want, Xbox Live, I'm not able to review those for you. And this is probably going to sound a little bit nitpicky here, but why exactly do you need to have gold in order to play survival mode? Why can't you, I don't know, play this by yourself like numerous other games that have a horde or similar type mode? And I can't help but get a little annoyed by this, but you know, whatever, what can you do? So, to wrap this review up, Deadfall Adventures is the definition of a game with an excellent idea that was poorly executed. Yeah, there's things I enjoyed about the game, but the 2 major problems I had were that 1, the AI was terrible on every single difficulty, and 2, the game just got real boring after a while. If I absolutely had to, I can look past all the other problems like the controls, bad acting, frame rate dropping, and all the other stuff I was complaining about earlier, if the gameplay was fun and kept me wanting more. The thing is, after I beat the game, I had absolutely zero desire to go back and play it for this review, so it was a grind to say the least. Even terrible games, for example, like Battle for the Pacific and Raven Squad, I can go back to because the games are so bad it's funny. I can play them over and over again and still get some enjoyment out of them. With Deadfall, I don't want to play it because I don't want to get bored. And I need to repeat myself again. I absolutely loved the idea for this game. An Indiana Jones-like first-person shooter sounds awesome, but the way it turned out was, well, disappointing to say the least.